My brother stood up in front of the probate judge and said the words I never thought a sibling could say out loud. Your Honor, my sister abandoned our father in a memory care facility for 3 years. She didn't visit, she didn't call. And now that he's dead, she wants to walk in here and claim half his estate like she earned it. I didn't move. I kept my hands folded on the wooden table in front of me, the way I'd been trained to keep them folded during pre-op briefings, during family conferences, during the worst conversations of other people's lives. My name is Reese Holloway. I'm 34 years old, and up until 90 seconds ago, I was a woman watching her younger brother wave a stack of nursing home visitor logs at a Cook County probate judge like they were going to bury me. He didn't know what was sitting in my attorney's leather portfolio. Not yet. Have you ever been the one in the family who doesn't talk much and watched everyone fill in your silence with whatever story they needed you to be? Tell me down in the comments. I want to know who's listening tonight. I didn't cry. I didn't reach for a tissue. I just sat there in a charcoal blazer that had been through more red eyes than most flight attendants, watching my younger brother Trevor perform grief like he was auditioning for a Lifetime movie. He wore a black tie that I'd never seen before, and a wedding ring that, 3 months ago, our father had paid for the diamond on. Trevor was 31. He'd lived inside a 40-mile radius of our hometown his entire life, and somewhere along the way he convinced himself that proximity was the same thing as love. He kept twisting the ring while he talked. She missed Thanksgiving, he said to the judge, his voice catching at exactly the right place. She missed his 75th birthday. She missed the day they moved him from assisted living to memory care. My wife and I were the ones holding his hand when he didn't recognize his own house anymore. Reese was in Chicago, doing whatever it is she does. And now she's here, in a $5,000 suit asking for half. I almost laughed at the suit comment. It was off the rack at Nordstrom Rack 4 years ago. But I stayed quiet, because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. In our family, the loud ones got the credit, and the quiet ones got the work. And somewhere along the way, I had decided I would rather have the work. My father, William Holloway, had been a high school principal in Springfield, Illinois for 28 years. He coached the boys' baseball team on weekends. He pronounced everyone's name correctly at graduation. When he was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 68, the whole town acted like a streetlight had gone out. Trevor had stayed close to home, taken over Dad's old house, and built a narrative around himself as the loyal son. Trevor sold insurance. He drove a leased Acura. And from what I could tell from the bills I'd been quietly paying for the last 4 years, he had also been the one signing my father's checks at the memory care facility, even though the checks themselves came out of an account he didn't fund. That account was funded by me, through trust, through a financial advisor in Northbrook who had been instructed, in writing, never to mention my name to my brother under any circumstances. The cost of being invisible is that people get to write their own version of where you've been. The lawyer Trevor had hired was a man named Doug Ferraro, and he had the kind of confidence that comes from never being seriously challenged. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket with one hand, and addressed the judge with the easy charm of a man who'd done 1,000 of these. Your Honor, this is frankly an open and shut estate matter. We have visitor logs from Pine River Memory Care covering 36 months. Ms. Holloway's name appears on those logs exactly twice. Twice in 3 years. We have my client's testimony. We have testimony incoming from the facility's director of nursing. And we have, as you'll see in Exhibit C, a handwritten letter from the decedent dated 18 months before his passing, in which Mr. Holloway expresses, in plain language, his belief that his daughter had, quote, left him to die alone. I felt my jaw tighten at that one, because I knew that letter. I knew the day it had been written. I knew what my father had been told that morning by the brother who was now using his own confused words to put me on trial. But I didn't react. I have stood over open chests with a heart fibrillating in my hands. I have told a 26-year-old woman that her husband didn't make it. I do not flinch in fluorescent lighting. The judge, a woman in her late 50s named Honorable Patricia Linwood, looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. Her face was unreadable, but I saw her eyes drop to the small enamel pin on my lapel. It was a half-inch caduceus, rendered in dark green and gold, with a tiny number engraved on the back that no one in this courtroom would understand. Most people, if they noticed it at all, would assume it was a graduation gift or a sorority pin. The judge looked at it for maybe a full second longer than a normal person would. Then she looked away. Trevor's wife, Brittany, was sitting in the gallery in a black dress that still had the tag tucked into the seam at the neck. I could see it from where I sat. Brittany was a substitute teacher who had married into our family 2 years ago and had decided almost immediately that the estate was the part of the family she liked best. She kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. even though I hadn't seen any tears come out yet. She was also, unbeknownst to her, currently the proud owner of a mortgage that had been quietly refinanced last spring at a much better rate than she could have qualified for, because the original lender had been bought by a holding company that had been instructed to be very kind to my family's accounts. I didn't tell people things like that. I never had. Doug Ferraro called Trevor to the stand. My brother walked up there like a man going to receive a medal. He raised his right hand and swore on a Bible that, growing up, our father had never once asked him to read. He sat down, smoothed his tie, and looked directly at the judge. "I want to start by saying," he began, "that I love my sister. I do. And what I'm about to say isn't about money. It's about accountability." I almost smiled. Almost. Almost. Reese left for college at 18, and she basically never came back. She'd send a card at Christmas. She'd call Mom on Mother's Day. When Mom died of breast cancer in 2019, Reese flew in for the funeral and flew out the next morning. Said she had work. Always work. Nobody in our family ever knew what the work was, exactly. She'd say she was a doctor, but you couldn't ever pin her down on what kind or where or who her patients were. She'd say things like, "I'm at a hospital you've never heard of." She'd say, "I can't really talk about the cases." At first we thought, okay, doctor stuff, fine. But after a while, it started to feel like she didn't want us to know. Like she was embarrassed of where she'd ended up. And I think, honestly, what she was doing was building a story about being too important to come home. He paused for effect. When Dad started declining in 2021, I asked her to come help. I asked her to take some shifts at the facility. Even just a weekend, a month. She told me, and I'm quoting her now, she told me, "I can't be there in person, but I can help in other ways." That was it. She'd send these vague texts. Thinking of him. Tell him I love him. But she didn't show up. Not for the diagnosis. Not for the move into Pinnagrove. Not for the day he stopped recognizing me. Not for any of it. And so when I got the call last March that he had passed, and I went to clean out his room, and I found that letter, the one where he wrote in his own shaky handwriting that he believed his daughter had abandoned him, I knew I couldn't just let it go. Trevor's voice cracked on the word letter. It was a good crack. The trickle. He had practiced. I watched the jury they had impaneled. 8 strangers and 4 alternates, all of whom had spent the last hour absorbing the image of me as the cold, career-obsessed daughter who couldn't be bothered to come home for her dying father. A heavy-set man in the second row was looking at me the way you look at someone who cuts in front of you at a deli counter. A woman in the front row had actual tears in her eyes from Trevor's testimony. I let it happen. I had learned a long time ago that the people who care most about appearing to care often have the least to actually offer. And I had also learned that a courtroom, like an operating room, is a place where you do not get a second chance to be calm. Doug Ferraro turned to me with a small, polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Holloway, I want to give you the chance to respond. Tell us, in your own words, what you were doing during the 3 years your father lived at Pinnagrove Memory Care. Walk us through it. Let's start with 2022. Where were you on Father's Day, June 19th, 2022? I looked at him. I was in surgery. All day? From 5:47 a.m. until 11:14 p.m. And the hospital, I'm not at liberty to disclose the location of that particular case. His eyebrows went up, theatrically, for the jury. Not at liberty. That's an interesting phrase for a doctor to use. Are you under some kind of confidentiality agreement that prevents you from telling this court where you work? Yes. With whom? I am not at liberty to disclose that either. Trevor laughed. It was a short, ugly laugh, the kind he used to make at me at the dinner table when we were kids, and I'd say something he didn't understand. The judge didn't reprimand him. Doug Ferraro pressed forward. Dr. Holloway, are you board certified? Yes. In what specialty? Trauma surgery. And your hospital affiliation? I'm not at liberty to disclose that. Ma'am, I have to be honest with you. This is starting to sound like a story. He turned to the jury. 3 years. 2 visits. A father with Alzheimer's slowly forgetting his own name. And the daughter, the surgeon, he made air quotes around the word, won't tell us where she works. Won't tell us who she works for. Won't tell us what she was doing on Father's Day, on Christmas, on the day her own father had to be moved into a locked unit because he tried to walk home in the snow. I let him talk. I had a phrase I used in trauma bays when a resident was panicking and making noise and not helping the patient. I would say, very quietly, let them finish bleeding. It meant, don't interrupt the situation that's already exposing itself. Just wait. Doug Ferraro was bleeding all over the courtroom floor and didn't know it. My attorney was a man named Adrian Park. He was 46 years old, born in Seoul, raised in San Diego, and he'd spent 12 years as a J officer in the Navy before leaving for a private practice that took on exactly the kind of clients my employer needed handled. He didn't wear a wedding ring. He didn't wear cologne. He had a very specific kind of stillness that I recognized because I had it too. When Doug Ferraro finally sat down, looking pleased with himself, Adrian stood up, didn't button his jacket, and walked to the bench. He carried a thin manila folder and a sealed envelope made of heavy black paper. The envelope had a foil seal on it. The seal was a circle with an eagle in the center. Anyone who had ever worked in or around the federal government would have recognized it from 20 feet away. "Your Honor," Adrian said, his voice calm enough that it forced everyone else's voice to feel suddenly too loud. "Before my client responds to any further questions about her career or her whereabouts, I'd like to present for the court's review a sealed declaration prepared under federal authority. The plaintiff has, in his testimony and in his counsel's questioning, made specific allegations about the existence and nature of my client's employment. Those allegations have crossed from civil dispute into accusations that, if uncorrected, would constitute a misrepresentation to a federal officer, namely you, Your Honor. Federal regulation requires that I correct the record." He held up the envelope. This declaration was prepared by the Office of the Surgeon General of the United States and countersigned by the Department of Defense Office of General Counsel. It is unsealed only upon order of a judicial officer and only when a case has, by the actions of the opposing party, made disclosure necessary. We are at that point now. Doug Ferraro stood up. "Your Honor, what is this?" His voice had changed. It was a half-tone higher. "This is a probate matter. This is a family dispute over an estate. Whatever document my colleague is holding has no relevance to whether or not Dr. Holloway visited her father." Adrian didn't look at him. Mr. Ferraro just spent 23 minutes asking my client whether her career existed. Her career, the existence of which has been put directly at issue by the plaintiff, is the relevance. Judge Linwood held out her hand. "Bring it up, counselor." Trevor's smile faltered. It didn't disappear. He hadn't quite caught up yet. He was still operating in the world he'd walked into the courtroom with. The world where I was a fake doctor with a fake job and a fake reason for never coming home. But he had started to feel the floor shift, the way a man feels the first tremor of an earthquake and assumes it's a truck going past. Brittany leaned forward and whispered something to him. He shook his head slightly, like she was bothering him. Adrian walked the envelope to the bench, set it down, and stepped back. Judge Linwood picked up a slim silver letter opener from her desk and slit the top of the envelope in one clean motion. She removed 3 pages of cream-colored paper. She read the first page. Then she set down her glasses and read it again, more slowly. Then she looked up. Her eyes went first to Adrian, then to me. Then, for a long, long beat, to Trevor, then back to me. And in her face, I watched something happen that I had only seen a handful of times in my life. I watched a person reorganize their understanding of the room they were sitting in. She picked up the second page, the third. She set them all down, squared the edges with her fingertips, and folded her hands on top of them. "Mr. Ferraro," she said. Her voice was different now, slower, each syllable placed with the kind of care a person uses when they realize they have been very close to making a serious mistake. "You have spent the last hour asking this court to accept, as established fact, that the defendant's career is fabricated. You have characterized her professional life as," she glanced at her notes, "a story. You have invited the jury to draw inferences from her refusal to disclose details of that career. I want you to understand that you have just stated on the record allegations against a commissioned officer of the United States Public Health Service holding the rank of captain, who has been seconded for the past 9 years to a federal program operating under classified authorization. Dr. Holloway is the chief of trauma surgery at a facility I am not at liberty to name in open court. She holds active credentials at 3 additional federal hospitals, including the one that received the Vice President of the United States in November of last year, after the incident none of us are supposed to know about, but which you may have read summaries of in the news. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the radiator clicking against the back wall. She has been bound, by the terms of her commission and by federal statute, from disclosing her workplace, her schedule, or her patients. The 2 times she appears on the visitor logs at Piner Grove Memory Care correspond to the only 2 windows in the past 3 years during which she was off rotation and not on call. Are you with me, Mr. Ferraro? Doug Ferraro's mouth opened, then closed. The judge wasn't done. The decedent, Mr. Ferraro. William Holloway was not abandoned. According to the financial declaration attached to this document, the entirety of his memory care, including the difference between what insurance covered and what Pine Grove charged, was paid through a trust established in 2021 by his daughter under an anonymous designation that she instructed her financial advisor never to disclose to her brother. That trust currently shows total disbursements of, she looked down, $271,400 over 36 months. Additionally, this declaration notes that an emergency neurology consult conducted in the second month of Mr. Holloway's stay at Pine Grove and credited in the facility's records to a, quote, visiting specialist from Northwestern was in fact arranged and personally underwritten by the defendant. The specialist was not from Northwestern. The specialist was a colleague of the defendant's who flew in from Bethesda at her request on a weekend as a favor. Mr. Ferraro, do you have anything you'd like to say at this time? He didn't. Trevor's face had gone the color of cold oatmeal. His mouth was slack. He was looking at me, and for the first time I could remember in our adult lives, he was actually seeing me. Not the version of me he had built in his head over 20 years of dinners. Not the cold sister, the absent daughter, the woman in the suit. He was looking at the actual person sitting across from him. And the actual person had been, for 3 years, the reason his father had a private room and a window that faced the garden. Brittany had stopped pretending to cry. She was staring at the side of Trevor's face with a flat, calculating expression. The expression of a woman who is mid-sentence in the divorce attorney conversation she's going to have in approximately 6 months. The judge turned to me. Dr. Holloway, I won't ask you, on the record, why you didn't simply tell your family. I took a breath. I let it out. Your Honor, when I took my commission, I signed a document that committed me to a level of operational confidentiality that I have not violated in 9 years. My family knew I was a doctor. They knew I worked long hours. They knew I traveled. What they did with that information, the conclusions they drew about what kind of person I had become, was not something I could correct without breaking my commitment. My father knew, because I told him in 2018, the only time I have ever told another civilian. He was diagnosed 3 years later. By the time my brother started asking questions, my father couldn't remember what I'd said. I paused. I made a decision, Your Honor, to let my brother believe what he wanted to believe. I made that decision because the alternative was either lying to him or breaking federal law. I chose the third option, which was silence. I understood that the cost of that silence might be exactly what is happening in this courtroom today. I accepted that cost when I was 25 years old, and I have not regretted it. Judge Linwood nodded once, slowly. Then she turned back to my brother. Mr. Holloway. Then she turned back to my brother. Mr. Holloway, stand up. He stood. His knees didn't quite want to. You came into this courtroom and you swore on a Bible. You testified, under oath, that your sister abandoned your father. You testified that her career is, in your words, a story she tells to feel important. You sat in that chair and you told this court, this jury, and your sister's face that she has been lying to you for 2 decades about who she is. I am looking at you right now, and I want you to understand something. Every dollar that kept your father in a private room at Pine Grove came from her. Every weekend nurse, every specialist, every prescription that wasn't covered by Medicare, the stipend that allowed you to work part-time for the past 3 years and call yourself the primary caregiver, the $850 a month that arrived in your account from a, quote, family wellness fund. That was her. The reason your wife's mortgage payment dropped $240 last spring, that was her. You have built a life on top of her, and you came in here today to bury her under it. Trevor's mouth opened. No sound came out. The judge let the silence sit. She did not rush it. She let him stand there in front of his wife and his lawyer and the jury, and feel every second of it. Then she said, I am dismissing the contest with prejudice. I am awarding the defendant her full statutory share of the estate, plus an additional reimbursement of $28,700 in legal fees, payable from the plaintiff's personal share. I am referring this matter to the Cook County State's Attorney for review on the question of perjury. Mr. Ferraro, your conduct in this matter will be reviewed separately by the Illinois Attorney Registration and Disciplinary Commission. We are adjourned. The gavel came down. Trevor sat back down hard, like his strings had been cut. Brittany stood up and walked out of the gallery without looking at him. I didn't stand right away. I sat there for a moment, my hands still folded on the table, and I let myself feel something I had not let myself feel, something I had not let myself feel in 9 years. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't even relief. It was the very specific, very quiet feeling of being seen. Adrian closed his folder. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. We had worked together long enough that we had a vocabulary that didn't require words. I stood up. I picked up my coat. I walked toward the gallery. Trevor was still sitting down. He looked up at me as I passed, and he opened his mouth, and the only thing that came out was my name. Reese. I stopped. I didn't sit. I didn't kneel. I just looked down at him, this man who shared my last name and my dead parents and almost nothing else. I didn't know, he said. I had no way to know. You had every way to know, I said. You just didn't ask. You didn't ask once in 20 years what I actually do for a living. You decided what I was, and then you spent 2 decades collecting evidence for a story you'd already finished writing. The hardest part of the last 9 years was not the surgeries. It was not the pager going off on Christmas Eve. The hardest part was watching you turn into a man who would rather be right about me than know me. His eyes were wet. I don't know if they were wet for him or for our father or for himself. It didn't really matter. The $271,000, I said. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a loan. It was what our mother would have wanted me to do, and I did it because I loved her, and because, somewhere in there, I still loved Dad. But it wasn't for you. None of it was for you. So when you sit down tonight and try to figure out what just happened to your life, I want you to remember that. I didn't owe you anything. I gave you everything I could give. And you sued me for the rest. I walked out. The hallway of the Daily Center was full of fluorescent light and the smell of old coffee. Adrian caught up with me at the elevator and handed me my briefcase. He didn't congratulate me, because we don't use that word. He said, the Surgeon General's office will need a debrief at 0700. I nodded. And there's a flight at 6:40 out of O'Hare. I'll be on it. The elevator doors opened. We rode down in silence. The lobby of the courthouse was busy with people fighting over things that mattered to them very much, and the world outside the revolving doors was a cold, gray Chicago afternoon in late February. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and pulled my coat tight around me. I thought about my father, the version of him that existed before the disease. I thought about the day in 2018 when I had told him what I actually did, and he had sat at his kitchen table in Springfield and cried, and then he had stood up and hugged me and said, I will never tell anyone, Reese. I promise. He had kept that promise, even after he could no longer remember my name. The disease had taken almost everything from him at the end, but it had not taken that. I unclipped the pin from my lapel and held it in my palm for a second. Then I put it in the inside pocket of my coat, the one over my heart, and I walked to the curb to find a cab. Years from now, when somebody asks me about the worst day of my professional life, I won't say it was the courtroom. The courtroom was easy. The courtroom was just a place where the truth caught up with the people who had ignored it. The worst day will always be the day, 3 years before any of this, when I sat in a parking lot outside Pine Grove Memory Care and watched my father, through the window, not recognize my brother, and realized that there was no version of the future where he would ever recognize me again. I had lost him a long time before he died. The trial just made it official for everyone else. If you've ever been the quiet one in a family that mistook your silence for absence, I want you to know something. You are not invisible. You are not what they decided you were. The people who refuse to ask the question don't get to be the authors of your answer. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. I think about that courtroom more than I expected to. Not the moment the envelope opened. Not the part where the judge said the words I had spent 9 years not letting myself imagine anyone saying out loud. I think about my brother's face when he sat back down. I think about the way Brittany walked out without looking at him. And I think about how all of it, every single piece of what happened that day, was something my brother built with his own hands. One assumption at a time, over 20 years. Nothing in that courtroom was an accident. Trevor decided, when we were young, that being loud was the same as being loved. He decided that being nearby was the same as being present. He decided that because he could not see what I did must not exist. And once he made those decisions, he stopped asking. That is the thing about a story you tell yourself. If you never ask whether it's true, you can keep telling it forever. And the longer you tell it, the more expensive it becomes to find out you were wrong. Trevor paid that bill in front of a jury. He paid it in front of his wife. He paid it on the record with his name attached. None of that was the universe punishing him. It was the natural arithmetic of a man who chose comfort over curiosity for 2 decades and then ran out of room. I've thought a lot about what I would say to a younger version of myself, the one sitting in a parking lot outside Pine Grove 3 years ago, wondering if she should just break the rules and tell her brother the truth. I would tell her this: doing the right thing is rarely loud and almost never witnessed. The work of being a good person is mostly invisible. You write the check no one sees. You take the call at 3 in the morning. You keep a promise to a man who can no longer remember he asked you to keep it. You do these things not because anyone will reward you for them, but because they are the things that make you the person you can stand to be when you are alone in your car at the end of a long day. The mind matters too. I am not ashamed to say that the reason I survived that courtroom was preparation. I had documented everything. I had a lawyer who understood what kind of envelope to bring. Smart is not a personality trait. Smart is what you do when you decide that the people who love you and the people who hate you both deserve a record of what actually happened. Build the record. Keep the receipts. Tell the truth in writing, even when you can't say it out loud. And the strength part is not what people think it is. It isn't a feeling. It's a habit. It's the practice of not flinching when someone you love describes a stranger and uses your name. It's the practice of staying quiet when speaking would cost you more than silence. It is the long, unglamorous work of becoming someone who does not need to be seen in order to be real. If you're the quiet one in your family, please hear me. Your life is not a story they get to finish. You are the one holding the pen,